It's Platt back with another episode of Value Spirits. The particular spirit we have today is George Dickel Rye Whiskey. Comes in at $24.99, so basically $25. You should be able to find this at pretty much any liquor store across the country for under $30, no problem. Rye whiskeys aren't necessarily the most, best-selling style of whiskey, but have really kind of caught on the last few years, and really more importantly with the craft cocktail movement. A lot of people love making rye, old fashions, Manhattans, whatever. If you're going to make cocktails, you don't want to get too excessively pricey on the spirit, so finding a good value rye is important. I think we might have one here. A little background on George Dickel. George Dickel is based in Tullahoma, Tennessee. It is the second largest distillery in Tennessee behind, obviously, Jack Daniels. It is a stop on the American Whiskey Trail, so if you take the trip, keep an eye out for Dickel. One of the things I noticed on the bottle is they spill whiskey without the E. That is the Scottish spelling. Most places here in the U.S. will utilize the Irish spelling with the E. Today, George Dickel is part of the Diageo portfolio of brands. Diageo, if they're not the largest, it's one of the largest spirits company in the world. And so they are part of, big bourbon, as some folks will say. The current brand itself started in 1964, but its history dates back a lot longer. George Dickel himself was born in 1818 in Germany, immigrated to the U.S. in 1844. Around the time of the start of the Civil War, George was working at or running a grocery store in the Nashville area. After the war, though, he decided to get into business for himself, created the George Dickel Company, who became basically a grocer wholesaler, but they were also wholesaling spirits. And we've talked about this with Scotch producers before. 150, 175 years ago, that was a great way to get into the spirits business, would be a grocery wholesaler, because you would buy direct from the distilleries and then bottle and sell to the customer yourself. And that was the model George followed for the next 20 years or so. And then by the time the 1880s came around, George was getting a little older, brought in a couple of partners, and they encouraged him in 1888 to purchase Cascade Hollow Distilling. It was one of the distilleries they were purchasing from, and just decided to bring this in-house. Again, a similar model to what a lot of the Scotch producers did. They kept the facility going all the way up until the 19-teens. That's when Prohibition started to catch on across America. I believe Tennessee went into Prohibition 1916, 1917, sometime around there. So they moved production temporarily to Kentucky until they went into Prohibition, and then in 1920, the whole country went into Prohibition. Now, unfortunately for Cascade Hollow at the time, they did not survive Prohibition. When Prohibition was repealed in 1933, they did not reopen. The distillery kind of laid bare for a few years until somebody came and basically bought the assets of the distillery itself, the brand George Dickel. However, at the time, they couldn't get the recipes. They had never written down the recipes for their old spirits, and they had to track down the old distillers to finally find those recipes, oddly enough. Eventually, that company got kind of balled in, wrapped together, and then eventually sold to a company called Shinley. Shinley was actually a big spirits producer back in the 50s. So much so that in 1956, they attempted to buy Jack Daniels. Now, Jack Daniels turned the deal down, but Shinley a few years later decided, I'm going to create my own Jack Daniels. So they got the Cascade Hollow Distillery basically out of mothball. They got some laws changed to where they could legally distill there. And then they brought the Lincoln County method. That's the charcoal filtering that Jack Daniels does that makes their process so unique, in contrast to bourbon. So Shinley basically created their own version of that, their own Tennessee whiskey, and they start the brand in 1964, George Dickel. Dickel is the other Tennessee whiskey maker. So Jack Daniel's not the only one. Real quick, let's talk about the rye whiskey itself. It is a little different. If you're not a fan of George Dickel, still keep this a try. One of the first things you'll notice on the bottle is it says distilled in Lawrenceburg, Indiana, for the Cascade Hollow Distilling Company. This is an MGP product. MGP stands for Midwest Grain Products. They source whiskey for a lot of places. If you go up and down the whiskey aisle in your local grocery store, a huge chunk of that is going to be from MGP. So this is an MGP product. Also, one thing you will notice on there is it does say chill filtered rye whiskey. Now, what does that mean? At room temperature, sometimes spirits may cloud up a little bit, have a hazy complexion, but if you try to filter it, you're not going to filter anything out. It won't do anything. But if you chill that whiskey enough, certain compounds and molecules will solidify enough that you can filter it out. Now, some people don't like chill filtering, even though it does make, a nice clear bottle of spirit for you. Some people say it strips out too much flavor. I will let you be the judge of that. Another thing to note on Dickel is the mash bill, or the rye mash bill. 95% rye, 5% malted barley. A little bit higher rye than you've seen a lot of them out in the marketplace. You generally don't see 100% rye. That is because rye is kind of finicky, and you'll see in a lot of these mash bills 5%, 8%, 10% malted barley, and that's because barley, the grain, lends itself with the enzymes inside to convert those starches to sugar. And so a lot of times, if you're making a rye or a corn whiskey, even wheated whiskey, you'll see malt. You'll see a little bit malted barley thrown in, and that is for that conversion. Not so much the flavor that you'll get from the malt, but more the diastatic power. So with that being said, let's dig in to some Dickel Rye. All right, on the nose, you can tell it's a little more aggressive than like a standard bourbon percent. On bourbon being higher corn, you'll pick up that sweetness. This almost has a wood polish kind of thing to it, because I do get the wood notes. Yeah, I get wood polish on that. Let's go in for the taste. Ooh, I get the pepper, but I get almost a hint of pepper mintiness too. There's a sweet, I've always heard eucalyptus used with rye, and I've always thought that's funny, but now I kind of, and this is probably the highest rye I've tried. I think this has even more rye than like a Old Overholt or wherever I tried. Yeah, that is got a little kick to it. It does come in at 90 proof, so we do have a little higher proof than the standard 80. Finish sits on the tongue a little bit. This is really a nice product. And again, that rye bite and aggression comes out in this, and I think it's enough that would transfer into a cocktail. So again, using this, even with something like an old-fashioned where you're adding like just straight simple syrup, Manhattans with a sweet vermouth, I think this still works. And again, at the $25 price point, if I'm doing a $65 bottle of rye, and I don't know if I'm using that for cocktails, but $25, no problem. So very nice rye, plenty of flavor, aggressive. I like that. It's at 90 proof, a little more oomph to it. Overall, pretty nice little rye whiskey. Well, I hope you liked this video. If you did, please subscribe down below. Also, please like the video because it lets YouTube know we're putting out good content. If you have any questions, comments, concerns, or spirits you'd like me to try, please leave them in the comment section. Or you can always contact me on the Twitter page. Till next time, bombs up.